Baruch is the Howard Hines University Professor in the Department of Engineering and Public Policy, Institute for Politics and Strategy at the Carnegie Mellon University. A graduate of the Detroit Public Schools, he holds a BS in Mathematics and Psychology from Wayne State University and an MA and PhD in Psychology from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences and of the National Academy of Medicine, and he's past president of the Society for Judgment and Decision Making and of the Society for Risk Analysis, as well as being a fellow of the American Psychological Association, the Association for Psychological Science, and the Society of Experimental Psychologists, as well as the Society for Risk Analysis. He has co-authored or edited myriad titles on risk communication, judgment, decision-making, human behavior, and of course, the science of science communication. Baruch, welcome to our panel, and over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Let's see. Yeah, okay, let me not dual task and share screen. Okay. Well, thank Christy. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really very grateful to have a chance to talk to this extremely important panel and committee that you all have. I really hope we collectively can help you make some progress on these vital issues. So I'd like to give a little background, talk about some sources of despair in dealing with the social side of things, some reasons for hope, and then some strategic challenges in realizing those reasons for hope. So by way of background, my introduction to the nuclear industry was a new reg that some colleagues and I wrote in over 40 years ago, and then became a book from Cambridge University Press. And since then, I've had an opportunity every year or two to work with some part of the nuclear industry, work with operators from Carolina Power and Light and doing probabilistic risk analyses. I've talked to various groups and so on. So what I would hope is that, here's how I view the industry, that I think that any industry depends on a commons of public goodwill that grows or shrink each time that the industry comes to the public's attention, which we certainly saw in the earlier panel today. The goal, I got these, yeah, so that goodwill, I have a slide out of order, sorry. So that goodwill, it affects how it's regulated, how it fares politically, how capital markets treat it in terms of the uncertainty that determines the price of capital, how efficient executives are, whether they're working on the industry or putting out fires, whether it can recruit and retain people who would like to work in the industry. The public may not discriminate among segments of the industry. As a result, poor performance in any segment can threaten the others. If poor performers cannot be distanced from the industry, then they must be helped. Conversely, good performers benefit all. So what might nuclear power entail, and where are the places that might affect people's judgment of the industry? Somebody working on mining, transportation, construction, power generation, waste disposal, proliferation, medical isotopes, careers, innovation, energy security, climate change. All of these combine to people's attitude towards nuclear power, and each of them have decisions that people within and outside the industry might make judgments about. So as a result, the communication must address the decisions that stakeholders face. Are there trucks rumbling through their neighborhood? Does somebody want to site a waste disposal in their neighborhood? Are they suffering from air pollution that might be replaced if a fossil fuel plant was with a nuclear power substitute for a fossil fuel plant? These may not be issues that the industry naturally considers, and may include issues that it's powerless to affect. And finally, that the communication process must matter as much as its content. And the slide that I had out of order, maybe I'll flip back to that, is I think for somebody like myself who's working in this arena as a scientist rather than an advocate, my goal is to help to facilitate a fair judgment of the industry relative to the alternatives, with the goal being fewer but better conflicts. That is, we should not have conflicts because people misunderstand what the industry and what it does, and we should not have conflicts because people feel as though they've been treated disrespectfully and are mad, and perhaps justifiably so, because when you treat people disrespectfully, you undermine their rights. They are worse off for it, in addition to feeling bad. Skip ahead a few slides. So now let's talk about sources of despair. What people, and when there were I think elements of that in this morning session. So one source of despair. This is the theme of a op-ed that I was invited to write for the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, is that everyone has faulty intuitions about how well they understand other people and and vice versa. And that includes scientists, engineers, political leaders, and others. And as a result, people communicate badly because they don't understand their audience, and then blame their audience because they don't understand why the audience doesn't understand them. And one of the things that the social scientists bring is ability to decode why we're not understood and how it is to make ourselves understood and what it is that people really want and believe. The second source of despair is that scientists, like everybody else, have emotions. So after Fukushima, I heard the correct pronunciation in the first session, I was asked to write something by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and I said, why don't you just reprint the thing that I wrote 2 years ago about the problems of the new industry's communications, because I felt that they had not been solved. That one knew that there was, for example, going to be an accident someplace in the world. One should have had tested messages ready to explain what was happening, and that just didn't. Just didn't happen. Of course, they wanted new copies, so I wrote about the emotions that people within the industry might be experiencing, and use this as a teachable moment for talking about some psychological research, not my research, but research I know something a little bit about. So if you're angry, it turns out people who study anger found that people who are angry are confident that they can overcome the obstacles, and they tend to blame other people for their problems, as opposed to people in other emotional states. People who feel dread, feel risk, they feel a lack of control that leads to frustration and simplistic solutions. They feel panic, which leads to social mobilization. People rally around to solve this problem, and it may paralyze individuals. And under stress, people regress to earlier states. They narrow their focus rather than embracing broader problems. And this happens to all of us, including people who have been perhaps unjust, are angry, feel all these emotions because they feel they've been treated unfairly by the public and can't figure out what the problem is. So why are there reasons? What are the reasons for hope? Well, we have science, some of which we're grateful to that you've put on this panel for dealing with these things. So my specialty is in the content of communication. So as we've heard in the previous session, information won't do everything because there are emotions, there's cultural values, and but also if you don't get the facts right, you don't do the content right, then people are much more likely to become emotional because they feel as though you have failed them to give the right information, and they don't know what to do, so they feel legitimately emoted. So here's the standard decision science perspective on communication. Find out the facts that are most important to the choices that people face. So that's about them, not about you. It's only explaining your technology to the extent that it fits other people's decisions. And you have to look at the facts that they need to know about competing alternatives. Find out what people know already. Design communications to fill the gap. Empirically evaluate your communications and then repeat as necessary, because you never get your communications right the first time. So anybody who writes a press release or a poster or whatever and then just puts it out because it looks good to them is guilty of a kind of communication malpractice. If anything isn't tested, it's malpractice. And this is a widely practiced discipline. People that I've had the honor to pleasure to work with. I worked on this wide variety of topics with the same discipline that uses the same core group of analytical techniques, uses the wide scientific basis that we have in psychology for how to explain different things, and the empirical research methods that are part of our expertise. So one way to think about this science is that behavior follows simple principles. Here are some principles of judgment. Here are some principles of choice. There are a lot of these principles, and that's why you go to get a PhD in psychology, to learn about the existence of all of them and to specialize in a few of them. And it is legitimate, even necessary, to specialize in one principle. It is inappropriate to base an entire industry on one principle. I thought that the first presentation this morning it had from Tom Wellock, basically described an industry that had gambled an industry on a simplistic bit of folk psychology. Just give them the facts and that'll work. And that's not a wise strategy. So behavior follows simple principles. However, the set of principles is large. The contextual triggers are subtle. The interactions are complex. As a result, communication requires a scientifically informed design process. But I would show you one study done by one of our graduate students, Yanran Yang. So Yanran has an undergraduate degree in English and a master's in nuclear engineering from Tsinghua, and with help from some people on your panel, tried to see whether if you inform people about emerging energy technologies, they could develop stable preferences and people will answer any question you give them on a survey, if only to make you go away. And so the question is, are those preferences stable enough that if you ask people in different ways, they'll give you the same thing? The way that Yanran did it, she positioned these decisions in a quasi-realistic context. You said there's a fossil fuel plant 30 miles from here. It's going to be retired, and it can be replaced by one of two or three emerging energy technologies, which you can see here. And she said, well, does it matter if you compare small modular reactors with each of them or with both of them? Here are some data. You can find them in the paper. The bottom line is that if you do a good job of explaining things, people can create stable preferences, but their choices depend on what else they're offered. So SMRs look good compared to some things in this study, but not good compared to other things. So if one wanted to use the science, there are strategic challenges in doing it. So it uses three things. It needs three things: staffing, process, and leadership. So the staffing is, you can't get it right unless you have people who really know the technology, unless you have risk and decision analysts who can figure out what of the fire hose of information that you could give to people is actually relevant to their decision. You need behavioral scientists to find out what's important to people, what they believe, design communications that might work, and then test the communication. And then you need communication professionals who can manage the process. That often, many of these processes, you need to, the best strategy is to develop the messages centrally and then enlist local people, local allies and partners who are trusted in particular communities, who can tailor the message who are trusted sources and who can tailor the message to the particular concerns, the ethos, the values of their community. So if you miss any of these, you can imagine what can go wrong. So you'll hear really wonderful work about the processes from the next two speakers. Here's a figure adapted from a Canadian Standards Association document that I think captures well what the process is that you develop a process, a proposal, a risk analysis, a technology, go through the usual stages. But at each of these stages, you have an obligation for two-way communication with the people who might be affected by it. So from the very beginning, you find out what their concerns are. You don't think, oh, all they want is X and we'll give them that. And you tell them or their representatives what it is that you're doing so that they're not blindsided. They don't have the feeling that it's a fait accompli, which is a sign of disrespect and a denial of the legitimate denial of their standing in the process. In situations where the technology is unfamiliar, people are very busy, it is not trivial to capture the it is not trivial to capture to create these venues for communication, but it's essential to the work. You need performance metrics. So communication is adequate if it contains the facts material to effective decision making. That's analysis. Users can access those facts. It gets to them. It's not hidden off someplace, and they can understand and they trust them. And finally, it needs leadership to make this happen. This is not. The senior management in the industry needs to buy into this, needs to see communication as strategic, not an afterthought. In that picture that it comes in at the very beginning, the senior management needs to assume stewardship over the entire life cycle of the technology, because if anything is done badly, it can redound to it, and it makes you vulnerable to the people who are against the technology for political reasons. The industry must press for industry-wide discipline, because anybody does anything wrong, everybody will pay. It needs to separate public affairs, which is getting the information, which is trying to sell the industry or tell how good the firm is, because every firm needs to do that, from the public health communications, which is telling people what are the risks and the benefits of this technology compared to competing technology, so they are trusted and they're able to render a fair judgment. And that finally, it needs to value trust as an intangible asset with tangible benefits in terms of your license to do work, the cost of doing business, the chances of success. So here's 3 articles that I wrote for it. They're in the slides if people are interested on different aspects of this. We've hosted a series of colloquia at the National Academy of Sciences and the Science of Communications. Here's the special issues for the first 3. Here's an article and a little book on this topic, which I hope will be useful to people.